All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jake McNeal. I'm a regional extension agent in Northwest Alabama. I split my time between the Limestone County Extension Office and the Belmont Research and Extension Center. I still feel as though I'm fairly new to extension, and so I appreciate Dr. Flanders for this opportunity to kind of give you an introduction of myself, my background, and some of the ideas that I have for irrigation management in the Tennessee Valley moving forward. And so I'll start with kind of a brief background and introduction of myself. Most recently, I finished my master's at Mississippi State, and I worked with the state irrigation specialist, extension specialist. And our main goal, our focus was creating irrigation management strategies using soil moisture sensors for Mid-South row crops. We primarily concentrated on corn, soybeans, peanuts, and rice, and began to dabble in cotton, but we didn't have the kind of information for cotton that we came up with for other major row crops in the Mid-South. What we came up with, or what we finished with by the time I left, were growth stage, or starting with crop, and then growth stage specific water requirements. That information, translates well across regions, across soil types or soil textures. For example, a soybean grown in the Delta in Mississippi is going to use, as a function of growth stage, a reasonably similar amount of water per day as a soybean grown here in the Tennessee Valley. However, what's uniquely different here are production practices that our farmers are going to employ, as well as the soil textures on which we find ourselves here in the Tennessee Valley. They're unique. So what we don't know, even though that we know now how much a corn or a soybean plant uses in water, how much per day, and then we're able to meet that demand by water delivery through whatever irrigation system that we might have. What we don't know specifically here in the Tennessee Valley are our soil water dynamics. And so we can learn a lot with the use of those soil moisture sensors and the data that we're getting from them, but it's just something that hasn't been explored here to the level that it has been elsewhere. And so the information that we can pull from other states or extension services like Mississippi State, there's others out there as well, it gives us a basis to go on for where to begin with a research irrigation management program here in Alabama. But that's really all it is a basis. We're going to be unique. The exact information that other states have, we can't use that exact same information here. A good example that I'll use, and may even refer back to it later in the presentation, I gave a farmer a number or a deficit value that we came up with for a specific soil texture in Mississippi for a specific crop. And his question was right on the money. He asked, well, what does that value mean here? I shrugged my shoulders and said, I absolutely don't know. And that's the justification for looking at some of these soil moisture sensors in the Tennessee Valley to gain a prescription. I would love to finally reach the point someday that for a given crop at a specific growth stage, grown on a specific soil texture and production practices as well, and whatever his method of water delivery is, to be able to hand him a piece of paper and say, look, here's your goal, a prescription irrigation management program. That's a long way off, but that's kind of the direction that my eyes are focused as we move forward. I've given a few presentations so far this year at the Wheat and Feed Grains, and then Dr. Delaney was nice enough to fill in for me at the soybean board. And so I'm going to kind of go through that presentation again, possibly in slightly more detail, and talk a little bit about my thoughts on irrigation management here in the Tennessee Valley. Like I said, this is pre-recorded, but please don't hesitate to get back in touch with me. Any questions, comments, disagreements that you may have, anything that you've got that we can work on together would be fantastic. So right now I'm going to share this screen that I've got with you. And here's what I've put together for irrigation management so far. Kind of my area, like I said, is Northwest Alabama, Tennessee Valley area. I do have 14 counties even as far south as Shelby, right outside of Birmingham, but mainly northwest region, north and south of the Tennessee River. So this is pretty rudimentary, base level stuff. What we're really talking about with soil moisture sensors are multiple single units, or a single unit with multiple sensors placed in the ground at different depths that is going to give us a reading on soil moisture in the profile. Different units read soil moisture differently. Some simply give us a tensiometer reading. Some do a calculation that actually puts it into acre inches. It really doesn't matter what those units say or how they read those units, what the units are. What matters is that we understand it and that we can convert it and then make the correct irrigation decision based on crop water use requirements, which largely that's going to be the same. We have a basis for understanding on that. But specific soil water use dynamics, something that we don't have a firm grasp on here in the Tennessee Valley. And again, that's kind of the justification going forward. I'll make this, this comment. As an industry, we're moving forward towards high yield crops. And of course, we always want to yield as high as we can. But as we push through 100 bushel an acre soybeans, as we push through 250, 300 bushel corn, moving forward well beyond that, which is just a matter of a few years, I believe, before that's the norm, our crop water use requirements are going to change accordingly. And right now, I'm going to use an example here in a few minutes that's going to show corn using approximately 1/4 to 3/10 of inch of water per day during the grain fill period. Don't be surprised at all if we bump that to 1/2 inch a day or greater when we move into some on average 300 plus bushel corn. We're going to have to change those water use curves accordingly, but that's going to be the same across region. So when I think about irrigation management or capacity on farm, on a particular farm, I think about agronomic factors as well as environmental factors. And kind of looking back at my experience in Mississippi, I used $10 an acre as a roundabout figure for what it was going to cost to deliver water. I've talked with a few producers here in Alabama, and sometimes that dollar figure is much, much less. Sometimes it's much, much more. So to kind of get this kicked off, get us all on a level playing field, if for some reason a farmer has such quality, good access to water, and once he's actually put his delivery system on his farm, whether it's a pivot, a drip, whatever he's using, if the actual delivery cost of water is so cheap for him, he's really not going to have that much motivation to invest further in irrigation management, because that's going to appear as a risk, something that's not worth it. And so for those type of producers, we're actually going to have to find a way to increase yield on the back end by timely irrigation. And if we can add consistently 5 bushels plus by doing that, then I think we're even going to get the attention of producers who, for them and their farm, water is incredibly cheap. There are going to be certain producers who merely saving an irrigation event, but that's going to represent a large dollar value for them. In that case, fantastic. I think we're even going to have a better audience in those producers. But the idea is that we can save water events early on and then later in a reproductive stage. We're a little bit more comfortable with stressing the crop even to a certain point earlier in the season. Not going to be willing to stress that crop whatsoever, even in late reproductive stages, but simply understanding what the crop actually needs is going to keep us from overwatering, which is simply money down the drain. Overall, our goals are maintain yields with less water for producers whose water is a high cost input factor, or increase yield with the same or less water in both scenarios, but even for producers who water is incredibly cheap. But we dealt with this a lot in the Delta. Water is an incredibly valuable resource. It is renewable, but only when it is managed properly. Depending on the source of your irrigation water, It's going to dictate to you some of the environmental regulations, state or federal regulations that you have to deal with. I'm not looking forward to the day that we see any of those stiffer regulations come to Alabama, but I do think that it's a matter of time, and hopefully that's well in the future, not even remotely on the horizon. But it is a point to say that I think our producers are as environmentally mindful and want to be stewards and good stewards more than anybody else on the planet. And so it is a point to make that we are responsible for good stewardship. Here's a few of the pictures of some of the technology that we've talked about using that I've gained some funding for. On the left, these are what we refer to as watermark sensors, the most economical, simple units that I personally work with, but they are a single depth unit. If you want multiple depths and multiple locations, you're going to be putting multiple sensors in the field. Time, labor. It's very possible to put one of these on the ground at a single depth and be under $50. You are going to need a unit that then reads these tensiometer readings that come from these watermark sensors. However, single units or even a few multiple units, and once you have that single unit that can read that data, very economical cost. On the right, we have an example of a Syntec. Syntex, depending on the data package that you purchase along with that, can be anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000, $3,500. They are going to take readings at multiple depths and then plot that data graphically and send it over a cloud-based system that you can log onto with an iPhone, an iPad, computer, and visualize that data as it plots it for you. This isn't anything new either, but this is what I'm talking about when we talk about daily water use in a plant, whatever it may be, whatever crop it may be in. A reading taken on the 19th of January right here, and hours and then days later, as this graph steps down, this stepping, it is meaning that there is progressively less and less water available in the soil profile. Through continued research, we can establish what these crop water stress levels are. And then early in the vegetative stage, knowing where that level is, we can push it, require that crop's root system to grow and to dig a little bit, potentially saving water use in the later reproductive stages in the season, while never allowing it to come anywhere near this crop water stress level during the critical grain fill period. And over on the right, this would be what multiple depths at a given location plotted one on top of the other would look like. These spikes that you see can be rain events or irrigation events. And then, like I said, plotted one on top of the other, various depths. So to kind of bring this back to an applied level, this information did come as a result of a lot of research. But this is as applied and as in field as it really gets. From when the crop emerges, and this is just an example of corn, soybeans is going to look very similar. Crop water use demand is going to increase gradually and then almost exponentially up to tasseling and silking, the beginnings of the reproductive stage, up to a quarter inch, probably in some cases pushing 3/10 of an inch a day. Thereby letting you know how much water is in your soil profile, looking at this graph, how much water the plant is using per day, and then giving you the opportunity to replenish that as we see fit. Again, our understanding of exactly how water behaves during the soil texture that we have in the Tennessee Valley and under our cropping practices is something that we still are in need of establishing. Here would be another example, and this would be a good example of how those watermark sensors read. Let's say that, for example, that we have one placed at 6, 12, 24 inches. And that tensiometer, or rather a pressure reading, it's 6 inches, 12, and 24, or 27, 46, and 88 respectively. Well, 6 inches represents a quarter of the whole profile that these sensors are measuring. So I'll multiply that value times 0.25. Similarly, for the 12-inch value, represents 1/2 of the profile being measured, and the 24 represents the full. So what that means is I'm going to multiply these values. Now, I apologize, I thought I had this put in there. And this value was going to be 96. Well, what does 96 mean? An example would be in Mississippi, we were comfortable with letting our values hit 100. Beyond that, knowing that we were going to lose yield. We were incurring a yield penalty past that point. What's that value? What's that yield penalty value here in Tennessee Valley or Alabama for that matter? I don't know. Maybe it's 50, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 75. It's somewhere right there in the middle. The good news is these watermarks provide an economical way to replicate research and find that information out in a relatively short amount of time. But those values are going to be dependent upon soil texture, crop, and growth stage. So kind of throw these terms around, sometimes interchangeably, but kind of throw them around a good bit with respect to deficits and thresholds. Kind of a deficit is the level to which we can allow soil water to reach before yield loss occurs. And that can kind of be measured in a numerical value, kind of like a tensioner, or graphically, or in acre inches. Thresholds are kind of the same deal. Excuse me. A point, a defined level or value to which we can allow the crop water level in the soil to reach before we know that it's time to trigger an irrigation event. Those levels are going to be a function of, more than anything else, growth stage and how long it takes from that point to get the pivot around the field or to get water in the soil profile. So here's another applied area, kind of just a picture put to words of what I envision when I say, conserving water. We know that in early vegetative stages, as well as in later stages, there's an opportunity to conserve water or really apply less. It's actually very possible for us to induce a water stress, or at least impede root growth such that the crop then stresses much easier later in the season. It's also possible to simply apply water that you don't need. And for those who water is incredibly inexpensive, that's not going to be justification enough to employ this type of technology or management. But for those who it is expensive, and that's an input cost that they would like to cut where possible, that's significant motivation. Later in reproductive stages, water demand is decreasing, but it's certainly still there, and we can hurt yield and incur a yield penalty all the way up to black layer if we allow that corner to stress, or all the way up to R6.5 in soybeans if we allow it to stress during that point. So by no means am I advocating that we flirt with that crop water stress level, but simply having an understanding of crop water use requirements. If we're well above that, there's certainly no need to irrigate again. Or if we have the right amount of soil moisture and we know that we're a few days out from black layer, or we're at R6.5 and we've got 3 to 5 days left of moisture left in our soybean crop, we turn around and walk away and we're done, and we're talking about getting in the field and getting it out, or harvest date application. I still use $10 an acre as a roundabout figure for irrigations. I think that's a good figure to either go above or below and kind of get an estimate for that former and on this particular field. I think it's a very realistic goal to consider cutting 1 to 2 irrigations per season. And we kind of adjust from that on a site-specific, field-specific case. So, and I'm by no means a specialist. This is merely one of the areas that I would like to go forward with. But my mindset, putting this on farm, we really do have to find willing cooperators, and by cooperators, that means that growers, we need to be placing an emphasis on placing sensors on farm with growers who are actually willing or have the ability to relinquish some management authority on their irrigation system. Now, hopefully that means on a very small portion of their farm, maybe it's 5 acres, maybe it's 10 acres. That's the ideal scenario for you or I to approach and place a sensor on an area that's indicative of a geographical landscape in the area, common production practices on a corn, soybean crop. But again, finding someone who will allow us to work with them, gain their trust and confidence, and have some management authority so that we really can do something different than what they're doing. Take your approach versus how we would like to do it, a conventional versus irrigation management focus to what they're doing. And so I think that's an opportunity that we have to genuinely earn the trust of growers in the area. While certainly we don't want to march on farm and really say, hey, we're here and we're taking it over. Dominant soil textures found in the Tennessee Valley is where we want to put these sensors. Split between corn and soybeans, I would like to have 5 sensors this year, 5 locations. And I don't envision that doesn't necessarily mean 5 different soil textures, but in rain-fed or pivot systems on 2 different soil textures in corn, and then 2 different in soybeans, with a third, placed in a complementary scenario somehow. I think there's a potential for a lot of good information to come out, even on farm. I look forward to the opportunity to work with some of the specialists on campus who are going to be able to do this in a replicated scenario, and then in the future manage these on-farm sensors in a way that complements what they're trying to do on a research farm in Auburn. Again, I keep trying to bring this back to an applied scenario. Water use in corn, soybeans are going to be the same. This is the area under which I'm confident that it's possible to cut irrigation costs or cut irrigation events and thereby cutting costs. I've kind of briefed over the justification. My understanding of crop water use can travel, so to speak. A soybean planted in the Delta is going to require the similar amount of water per day during each growth stage as a soybean plant planted here in the Tennessee Valley. What's going to be very different are their crop production practices and soil texture. And those are some things that require us to be, that require research here in the Tennessee Valley. Our producers are far too intelligent, far too wise to merely take the information gathered elsewhere and apply it on their entire farm without any question. I want to be able to hand them a irrigation prescription that I have confidence in, and it's going to deliver the water that their crops need when they need it, and do so with a focus on saving irrigation on the front end. That's absolutely important, but do so with the mindset that we are going to find a way to increase their yield, that we're going to put more grain in the grain cart for them. I made the comment earlier, I'll say it again, that I think that some of this research, that by the time here in Alabama that we establish these deficits and thresholds here in our state, I think that by that time we're going to be beyond 300 bushel corn, or that there will be enough demand, will be enough acres that are in that high yield scenario that their crop water use is going to be different. Same thing for corn, the same thing for soybeans. And so these crop water use values as a function of growth stage, incredibly important. I know that Dr. Delaney is working on some of that with one of his graduate students. I think that will evolve, even though we have some of that information right now. What we don't have, again, is the soil water dynamics here in the Mid-South, or here in Alabama. That's kind of the presentation that I went over the past few meetings that I've been to, and once Dr. Delaney briefed over that for me when I couldn't be there. And so that's kind of an insight into my background, and my background kind of dictates these first few steps that I would like to take here in Alabama. I think that's about all I've got. I'm somewhere around the 25-minute mark. I really appreciate everyone who took the time to listen in. I hope you've got some comments. I hope you've got questions. Criticism is great too. I look forward to working with each and every one of you. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. Thanks, everyone.